Is it really true that returning to the moon is easier than getting there the first time? The opposite idea feels almost inevitable. We have the maps, we have the calculations, we have computers infinitely more powerful than those of the 1960s, and above all we have already proven it can be done. If a species has already walked on another world, common sense suggests, then that world is essentially solved, and yet the moon is not a closed chapter. It is an environment that punishes shortcuts and exposes every simplification. Change the question, and the answer changes. In the Apollo era, the question was, can we get there before anyone else, even at enormous cost, even accepting a level of risk no society today would tolerate? Today, the question is, can we get there in a way that is repeatable, sustainable, with procedures that do not depend on a single stroke of political and economic fortune? This difference, seemingly philosophical, translates into concrete engineering and unforgiving constraints. When a crewed capsule leaves Earth orbit and slips into a trajectory toward the moon, it is not simply redoing Apollo. It is recreating a chain of events that must work without the excuse of historical urgency. In 1968, with Apollo 8, 3 people crossed for the first time the psychological boundary of Earth orbit. It was both a technical and cultural leap. The famous Earthrise over the lunar horizon was not just a photograph. It was a collective shift in perspective, an entire planet contained in a fragile disk suspended in darkness. But that mission carried a constant shadow behind every decision: the race. The priority was to arrive, to prove, to beat. Money flowed as in no other period of NASA's history, because the project was not only scientific, it was a symbol of supremacy. Urgency shortened discussions and widened the space for risk. Today, that space for risk has changed because society itself has changed. After accidents, after decades of orbital flight, after a safety culture that has grown more sophisticated and more demanding, the idea of "let's try and see what happens" is no longer acceptable. And this creates a paradox. To carry out a mission that, at first glance, seems less ambitious than a lunar landing, often requires greater complexity. A crewed flight on a lunar trajectory must prove that life support systems can endure for days in deep vacuum, that radiation protection is measured, not merely hoped for, that communications can withstand planned blackouts when the spacecraft passes behind the moon, that power, thermal control, and water systems do not fail over tiny details. Even a simple component like a sanitary system, in microgravity and under extreme thermal cycles, can become a critical point, because in space there is no such thing as improvised maintenance. Every failure tells an uncomfortable truth. You are not just carrying people to a distant place, you are carrying an artificial ecosystem that must remain alive in a physical desert. There is another difference, often overlooked by those who think of the moon as a single, monolithic achievement: the geometry of the journey. Apollo 8 entered lunar orbit and completed 10 revolutions around the satellite. To do so, it had to fire its engine at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right place, knowing that a mistake meant being trapped or crashing. Modern missions, when they choose free return trajectories or wider passes, are opting for mathematical prudence, setting a path from the start that, even with a margin of problems, brings you back home. This prudence is not cowardice. It reflects a different goal. If you want to go back to the moon many times, you cannot rely on statistical heroism. You must turn the feat into a procedure. And this brings us to the question that has made more than half a century of silence seem so strange. Why haven't we gone back? Because Apollo had a simple metric: the planted flag, the footprint in the dust, the televised proof. Once achieved, the political incentive was spent. The cost was enormous, and for public opinion the benefit began to feel repetitive. The moon risked turning from miracle into routine. And a routine that expensive cannot survive without a new reason. Today, that new reason is often expressed in a phrase that sounds almost harmless: go back to stay. But staying does not simply mean placing a habitat and breathing. It means solving problems Apollo could ignore because it stayed only briefly. Lunar dust, sharp and electrostatic, gets everywhere and degrades seals and filters. Lunar nights last about 2 weeks and demand an energy strategy that is more than just batteries and go. Radiation is not a nuisance. It is a biological budget. How long can human tissue be exposed without excessively increasing future risk? And then there is the obsession that has reshaped how we look at the moon. Water ice, especially in permanently shadowed polar regions. Water means life, but in space it also means fuel, because from water you can obtain oxygen and hydrogen. If a usable resource truly exists on site, then the moon ceases to be just a destination and becomes a logistical node. The problem is that, if it truly exists, opens an abyss of uncertainty. How much water? Where? In what form? How accessible is it? How much does it cost to extract compared to bringing it from Earth? And while science struggles to answer, engineering must already design vehicles, procedures, thermal shields, and landing systems. This is where the comparison with Apollo becomes almost unfair. Apollo was a 10-year sprint, compressed, vertical. Artemis is a long promise, made of stages that must fit together. The launcher, the capsule, the modules, the landers, the infrastructure, the orbital windows, international partners, private companies, budgets that shift with every political season. In a program like this, uncertainty is not a marginal flaw. It is a force that distorts everything. If one key element slips, the entire structure shifts. And today, the most delicate element is not the capsule that carries astronauts near the moon. It is how those astronauts will actually descend, and above all how they will ascend again to return home, because landing is only half the problem, and the easier half to tell. The capsule that crosses deep space is a vehicle for survival and return. It is not an elevator to the surface. For that, you need a completely different landing system, capable of maneuvering near the ground, handling engine plumes that lift dust like a slow explosion, touching down without tipping, and taking off again. And when you choose a modern lander, you are often choosing an industrial philosophy as well. Reusability, orbital refueling, production chains, repeated testing. It is a different world from Apollo hardware, built like a single projectile, used once, either perfect or failed. If the goal is a continuous presence, then the logic of the hardware must also become continuous. But that means accepting that the initial phase will be slower, more frustrating, more full of delays, because you are building not a gesture, but a system. And a system is not judged by its most epic moment, but by its reliability when no one is watching. It is precisely when no one is watching that the hardest question emerges. What is the real reason today for sending humans back to the moon, beyond fascination and beyond nostalgia? The most honest answer is not singular, nor is it comfortable. It is an unstable sum of science, technology, geopolitics, and collective psychology, and each component can shift in weight from one year to the next. If there is a thread connecting them, it is this: the moon is not just a place. It is a rehearsal. But a rehearsal for what, exactly, depends on how much we are willing to pay, in time, in money, in patience, and on how much we are willing to accept that the path toward that future will not be linear, and will not resemble the simple story we have told ourselves about Apollo. In a modern program, technology is not enough, because technology must coexist with politics. And politics, unlike orbital mechanics, does not obey universal laws. A project can be accelerated or amputated by decisions that have nothing to do with engines. A planned infrastructure can be scaled down or cancelled because the strategic vision changes, or because costs become difficult to defend. Even when official language speaks of cooperation, competition remains in the background, more nuanced, but no less real. It is no longer two blocks facing each other with a flag. It is many actors, national and private, moving within a multipolar system, where access to deep space becomes an industrial and strategic capability. And when a capability becomes strategic, the calendar is never just a calendar. This is one of the reasons why haven't we gone back, has no romantic answer, but rather a thermodynamic and administrative one at the same time. Going to the moon once is a peak. Going often is a curve. A peak can be fueled by a surge of money and attention. A curve requires constant political maintenance, and maintenance is what societies do worst, because it is invisible. To sustain a curve, you must keep buying rockets, keep testing, keep paying engineers, keep building facilities, keep verifying. You must accept that success is not a single day of glory, but 100 days in which nothing spectacular happens, and precisely for that reason, everything works. Science, however, has a particular way of making what seems repetitive feel extraordinary. Every human flight to the moon is also a biological and physical experiment in conditions that Earth orbit does not fully replicate. Beyond the magnetic field, the radiation environment changes. Astronauts become living sensors, instruments that measure with their own bodies a risk we can only simulate on Earth. Medical procedures, the ability to diagnose and manage problems with delayed communication, the psychology of isolation in a confined space while outside there is a void with no foothold, each of these is a piece of knowledge needed if the ultimate goal is to go farther. The moon is close enough to allow a return, far enough to shatter the illusion of still being at home. It is a didactic distance. It shows you the mistake before it becomes irreversible. There is also a subtler, almost philosophical aspect, often reduced to slogans. The moon as a test bed for using local resources. If you can use what you find, you stop dragging every gram with you as a burden. In technical terms, this is called in situ resource utilization, but behind the phrase lies a logistical revolution, turning a celestial body into a place where you work, not just where you arrive. But logistical revolutions are slow, because they require machines that dig, heat, separate, purify, store. They require continuous energy. They require materials that can withstand extreme swings. They require a mission architecture that does not depend on a single perfect launch. And above all, they require a question: how much infrastructure is worth building before the scientific or strategic return becomes tangible? This is where the idea that Artemis is Apollo with better computers collapses completely. Apollo could accept a very high cost per mission because the value was symbolic and immediate. A program that aims to stay must first build redundancy. Redundancy means duplicate lines, duplicate systems, escape routes, extra consumables, emergency scenarios. Every layer of safety adds mass. Every kilogram added demands more propellant. More propellant requires larger tanks. Larger tanks require stronger structures. And stronger structures increase mass again. It is a loop that, if not controlled, devours the project. That is why modern engineering seeks reusability, refueling, modularity. But these concepts, which sound like solutions, are also new sources of risk. Refueling in orbit means creating a chain of events that must succeed many times, not just once. Modularity means interfaces and dockings that cannot fail. Reusability means inspection, maintenance, standardization. Every solution opens a new chapter of complexity. So why insist? Because the moon is a ruthless mirror of our ambition. If we say we want to explore the solar system with human beings, the first real question is not, how far can we go, but, how long can we stay alive far from Earth? The moon is the first practical answer. It is a natural laboratory for learning how to build protection with regolith, how to manage energy in a day-night cycle that shows no mercy, how to design habitats that do not behave like tin cans, how the human body changes during longer and more isolated missions. It is also a scientifically unique place, an archive of impacts that tells the early history of the solar system, a platform for astronomical observations in certain bands, a terrain where geology is preserved differently than on Earth, because there is no rain, no wind, no tectonics to remix everything. And yet even this does not make the choice inevitable. The most uncomfortable truth is that returning to the moon is a societal decision, not a technological destiny. Technology makes it possible. It does not make it necessary. Necessity is created by a combination of goals, inspiration, industry, national security, science, economic future. And that combination can change. If it weakens, the program slows. If it strengthens, it accelerates. That is why every announced date is always a hypothesis standing on many legs. If one leg gives way, the date slips, not because we are not capable, but because we are attempting something more fragile than a single landing: continuity. And there is one final paradox that makes everything more compelling. The moon is close, and precisely for that reason, it becomes a ruthless testing ground. If you fail on Mars, you can blame the distance, the communication delays, the impossibility of a quick return. If you fail on the moon, you fail in your own backyard. It is like stumbling a step from the finish line. This psychological, public, and political pressure is immense. And it is one of the reasons why caution dominates. A mission that loops behind the moon and returns, without landing, may seem less than Apollo. In reality, it is how a modern program builds trust. It proves that the vehicle, the crew, ground support, navigation, and re-entry function as a single organism. It proves you can take humans into deep space and bring them back with margin. It is a step that does not echo like a footprint in the dust, but without it, every future footprint would be too great a gamble. And perhaps this is the hidden point behind the original question. We did not go back for 50 years because we no longer had the urgency of a flag. We are going back because we are searching for something harder than a flag: a method. A method for inhabiting, even briefly, a world without air. A method for turning exploration into presence. A method for making repeatable what was once unrepeatable. And when the stakes become a method, success is no longer a single heroic act. It is the ability to repeat the feat without it seeming like a miracle each time. If we succeed, the question will change again, and the moon will stop being the return and become the departure. If you've made it this far, it means you value curiosity as much as we do. If you enjoyed this journey, leave a like, write a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support what we do. Your presence truly makes a difference. Until the next exploration.